I'm excited today. I really am because a good colleague of mine, Per Caro, has joined us, formerly of SageFlow, and we're going to talk a little bit about this thing that everyone loves to talk about, but sometimes has a hard time to deliver, and that's hyper-personalization. So, Per, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then let's jump into hyper-personalization.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it. And it's lovely to talk to you again today. Yeah, I was just thinking it's been 20 years and 5 days since I've been in the email space. And I feel like we've been talking about personalization since the day I showed up, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Went back when we used to sell to IT people, and they were more concerned, like, oh yeah, we got like a big list, it's 5,000 names, it's pretty massive.
Yeah.
So this idea that we can send emails with personalization is something we've talked about a lot, and I think a lot of people do it, but I'm still frustrated that I've been with a company like Eddie Bauer for 30 years. And I'm 6'7", 6'8", depending on how much yoga I do and how many inversions and stretch out my spine.
Yeah.
But I still get emails for a sale on women's sweaters, and it's a joke I've been making for a long time because it still hasn't been fixed.
Yeah.
And when we start talking about personalization, it's not only male, female, or whatever designation that I feel comfortable with. It's also inventory. And are you offering me something that you actually have in my size? Like, I got size 14 shoes. Do you have a size 14 shoe in this thing you're offering me? That's really important. That's that level of personalization that we're definitely headed to, and we're starting to see more of that. But with everybody's data lakes and kind of passing information hither and yon, it kind of gets a little bit confusing and lost in the mix.
Well, tell me though, we hear the word personalization and then we hear the word hyper personalization. Give
Right.
me an example of one versus the other, because I think that's really important for this discussion.
Sure. Personalization is going to be based on your buying habits, what
Mm-hmm.
you be interested in. And so when
Mm-hmm.
we say that, it sounds really simple, but you have to take considerations. You're currently in Michigan. I'm
Mm-hmm.
currently outside of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
You have light rain, and I think it's going to be 94 degrees today. So when we start pitching offers at this time of year, you can
Mm-hmm.
safely start sending me light sweaters and light coats and
Mm-hmm.
send you thick, heavy down things with fur collars, right?
Right.
That's like a really basic thing. But then you started getting into income brackets and buying habits and personal style. That's where you get into hyper personalization, and
Mm-hmm.
that's still the dream. And there's companies that are out there trying to do this, and when I talk to them, they're still kind of on that personalization level,
Mm-hmm.
and it frustrates me
Mm-hmm.
because when we talk to retailers specifically,
Mm-hmm.
we as consumers are really interested in something in a really small window of time. So if you're going to hit me with an offer, it better be
Mm-hmm.
really well chosen. And that's where email has really shifted. I mean, email is still the prevalent communication methodology for
Mm-hmm.
most people. And the
Mm-hmm.
best way to send us offers, don't send me a text offer
Mm-hmm.
for a sweater, right? That's just going to piss me off. But if you
Yeah.
send me something that's appropriate and timely, then I'm not going to consider it spam. So that
Yeah.
you kind of get into that base level. But when we get into hyper personalization, it's,
Mm-hmm.
do you have it in inventory? Do you have it in my size? Is this the kind of style I've actually been buying from you? I'm a
Right.
pretty simple guy, right? I wear t-shirts and polos and sweaters. For work, I wear dress shirts and dress coats. Have I bought those from you? Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what I'm buying? Don't send me something with like super garish colors if I predominantly buy black and dark blue,
Okay.
because of my size, I don't like to draw attention to myself with garish colors. It's a
Yeah.
style choice, right? So we as advisors to these companies need to be really cognizant of that and kind of try and think through the process. What do we as consumers want to receive? Therefore, what are these companies should be offering, and what is the next thing? So when we get into that hyper personalization, we're talking about real deep things. When we start talking about something that's near and dear to both of our hearts, restaurants and franchises and that industry, um, it's really important that if you start thinking of things like food preferences, and as we migrate with a lot of these uh, QSRs, quick serve restaurants,
Uh-huh.
over to plant-based. And as
Mm.
more and more people eat plant-based or cholesterol or low salt, and as nut allergies and allergies writ large, right? Those are all things that are taking the QSR space by storm. And it's something you and I track a lot of, but it's really important that we be aware of that when we send out communications to somebody. Because if you're Four Guys is a great restaurant chain, like they've been around forever. They were
Mhm.
started, as I understand it, by predominantly Jewish groups. Therefore, you see a lot of their owned restaurants don't have dairy combined with meat, so you can't get that combo, right? That's so classic in the hamburger space. But if you start sending people things that offend them, that's
Mhm.
probably a bad thing to do. So you and I are really passionate. SageFlow and iPost both have offerings for QSRs and for franchises. So
Yeah.
it's really important that we talk when we talk to those folks, and we kind of discuss. We need to discuss, how are you empowering your franchisees to be able to
Mhm.
send communications out to their clients, not only from corporate, but from
Mhm.
down in the weeds, right? How is somebody who owns four, I'll use Culver's, one of our clients,
Mhm.
how are you going to talk to somebody who owns four Culver's and
Mhm.
get them to be able to send out an email communication to their folks saying, hey, there's a storm
Yeah.
outside our Columbus
Mhm.
location, please
Mhm.
don't go. We're closed, right? And it's dangerous to drive on the roads, right? Those are the kind of emails that are really time sensitive. But then you've got generic ones, right, where you're sending out, it's Friday, it's the big game, come on down. But then you get
Sure.
into that hyper personalization angle, which is only sending somebody plant-based options or
Yeah.
allergen. You're aware of their allergens because you ask them, and then you send things that are appropriate for that, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think all of this centers around the capture of data, right? And the ability for the consumer or the person on the other end to make sure that they keep it up to date and things of that nature. And I want to caution everybody, right? Because to get to hyper personalization or even just a first level personalization, to not come out of the gate swinging, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes there has to be, it's an overwhelming process. Like, how do these people get this data on me? The use of or appending of data or the ability to append demographic data and things of that nature. It sort of has to be eased in. And so I would encourage everybody, especially if you're in the franchise, right, to say, before we start to personalize and get down to the hyper personalization, geographic location is a known thing, right? We all should know where people are and where people are from. But I think when we start talking about getting into specific preferences, whether it be size or whether it be an allergen or whether it be their preferences when they walk in to that specific location, that has to be done, over time. One thing that I am very interested in is, we've talked to, like, you've been in the industry as long as I have, right? We talk about this personalization and hyper personalization, and it feels like we've got echolalia. We keep repeating ourselves and talking about it. But yet, one of the things that kind of is troublesome to me is that there's really no long-term study around the effective use of hyper personalization and the pain sometimes it takes to get there, use it, and then are they actually seeing that ROI? I'm curious if I make that heretic statement, right? Of, well,
No,
gosh,
no.
does it
I mean, that's
work?
a
Right?
yeah. No, it's good to challenge our conventional wisdom, right? Because it could be that everybody just wants to know that green milkshakes are back for St. Patrick's Day, right? Something really dumb, or orange spice
Yeah.
or no, pumpkin spice, sorry. Pumpkin spice milkshakes are back, or,
Yeah.
like whatever. And I think you are right. Uh, I think the word iterative has to be used a lot in our space, because we should always be changing in an
Mhm.
iterative fashion. The other one is testing, right? I'm a huge fan of testing. I know you are as well. Um, because you're right, we could get it so personal that the person goes, wow, I'm really terrified that this mom and pop Culver's knows this much information about me.
Exactly.
Um,
Right. Right.
and part of that is transparency, right? Like, it's always a good idea to say, we understand because you took this survey that you
Hmm.
have a nut allergy, and that's why we're like, say it's someplace in there, and people, I'm gonna put on my old man hat. People are
Yeah.
dumb, right? People who receive emails are just plain dumb. Most of the people you and I hang out with, very
Yeah.
smart, very,
Yeah.
very savvy, but everyone else are idiots, right? So you can be as well intentioned as you want. And I'm
Mhm.
going to put myself in the dumb camp for a second. I get up, I haven't had my go-go juice, and I get an email and I go, what the hell? Why are they sending me this? Well, it's because I misread it, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm tired and I'm
Mhm.
not fully there. Um, but you are right. The question of how personal is too personal has to
Mhm.
be appropriate to the space that we're talking about.
And
Um,
that's where we go back to the iterative and to the testing, right? Do we feel as if we get better results, whatever that result or KPI we want to determine in advance, by personalizing or hyper personalizing versus not? And so I'm of the camp that I'm not going to wave my flag around and say personalization is the key to success for everybody, because it may not be. And we have to treat our subscribers, or the people that read our emails or our texts, or involved in our apps and things of that nature, that they're an individual and they may or may not respond to being personalized or hyper personalized. They may just want something uh, that they feel as if the brand knows a little bit about them without getting over into the creep factor, so to speak. One other mention about franchises, because I know that Sage Flow is your former employer, is really into the franchise model, and one of the ICPs, one of our very main focuses at iPost is that of franchises. What would you do if you had an audience of 1,000 franchisors in front of you talking about personalization? What are some advice that you would give, and then we'll just do a wrap up. I'm curious
yeah,
as to what you.
absolutely. First thing is, that email is cheap. You want to be able to use email.
Mhm.
It's important that you understand the rules for communication in the email space. And there's some real great basic articles out there. I've written them, you've written them and commented on both of our companies. If you go to our websites, you'll see a bunch of stuff on the SageFlow site, on the iPost site, and elsewhere.
Yeah.
Um, and the basic rule of thumb is, email is not spam if it's something I want to hear. Email
Yeah.
is spam if it's something I don't want to hear. That's like my super simple definition. So
Yeah.
it's important for you as a franchise or casino, which is kind of a nebulous franchise, right? You've got all these divisions within it that you have to work with. It's important that you understand when and why and how you communicate with people. The how is, email is the simplest one.
Mhm.
If you're doing something like table reservations, I'm thinking Cheesecake Factory, text is much more appropriate, right? So those are the appropriate levers to push there. The when is, if you know that you're a fan of a certain football team, like I am in Santa Fe High School is right down the street. If I was a fan of their team, I went to competing Terra Linda, which is across town. But
Yeah.
if I cared about that, then send that to me. If I don't care about that, that's not really going to resonate, right? So that's where we get into some of that personalization and asking questions, surveys, and then also on the flip side of that is making sure on all of your communication you have like, click here to go to your preference page and be able to adjust these things, right? Because that's something that I think is super important to be able to have that transparency so that you're sharing that. And then you can add questions there so that you can, when we get into the things of, do you want plant-based versus chicken versus beef versus fish on your communication? And it's right there. People are going to
Right.
be a lot more forthcoming.
Right.
So when I talk to franchisors, my first thing is be consistent. Set,
Mm-hmm.
put a calendar reminder the first whatever of the week or the first thing of the month. Make sure to consistently send your folks some communication. Make sure
Mm-hmm.
it's as relevant as you can make it. Don't send something to send something. But also, if you don't send something, people forget that they signed up with you. So it is important to not use this thing 4 times a year, but use it monthly, start monthly and then start week, migrate to weekly and see where you start losing people through testing, and take it easy and make this an iterative process, to use that word again.
If I had 500 or 1,000 franchisors in front of me, the first thing I would say is your inbox, your own inbox, is not a playground for how you feel you should do your own email program, right? It's almost as if you had 500 or 1,000 of your own customers in front of you and you're talking to them individually, right? You have to understand and know your customers, not just what you want to say, but what they're feeling and thinking and talking and how they would like to be communicated with. This whole humanization aspect was one thing that COVID taught us, right? Is that people connect with brands that feel as if they can make this sort of deep human connection to. So how would you do your email program is not what you get from your competitors or from other people that you subscribe to, but if you had 1,000 of your own customers in front of you, how would you want to speak with them, and so forth. So let's wrap up real quick, because I'd love to get your final thoughts on just personalization, hyper-personalization in general. If I'm just starting out, what do I do? What's your final thought on that?
Man, first step one,
Yeah.
start asking for email addresses, right? I mean,
Oh,
it's
what?
stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
it's stupid, but how do you do that? Like, do you have a
Mhm.
kiosk in your thing, and then you got to write some code for the kiosk, blah 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 blah? Do you live in a part of town where the kiosk is going to get stolen? Like, you guys, seriously. Do you put it at the bottom of receipts? That's my favorite thing, is at the bottom of the receipt, here's my email address, please send me information. A lot of the payment systems now collect email addresses because they send receipts via email. So to make sure you're getting that information filed
Sure.
back to you or back to corporate, your corporate, if you're part of a franchise, that corporate, are they collecting email? Like, that's number one. But second is, what do you want to hear from us, and give people a couple of options. Like I said, I'm a big fan of your profile pages, and make sure that you've got one for your company, and think that through. And then you can start sending emails. So those are the baseline things. Do you have the email address? What do they want to hear about? And then
Yep.
be consistent with your messaging. Those are my 3 takeaways.
My big thing is, if we were just starting out, is it's not a sprint, it's an ultra, ultra, ultra marathon, right? We can come out of the gate really fast, but we're going to make mistakes. If we treat it as if this is the start of a relationship, and that relationship is going to last 100 miles or 200 miles like ultra marathons do, we need to sort of ease into it without sort of clubbing them over the head with communications right away to get them to convert over and over and over again. It's an ultra marathon. So with that, I hope everyone felt like they get something out of this. I wanted to thank Per for your wisdom, your thoughts. You've got an amazing background. You've brought some really interesting things to hyper personalization, or at least got me to think about a few things. Please connect with Per on LinkedIn. We'll post all of his all of the places to get a hold of him. And keep watching. And thank you, everybody, for your continued support of Email Never Sleeps. We'll see you next time. Thanks again,
Thanks
Per.
so much, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.